Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into the French Revolution. Over the next 10 minutes, we're going to unpack exactly how a society teetering right on the edge of total collapse completely rewrote the rules of human history and really changed our world forever.
But before we get into the play-by-play, let's start with a massive paradox. Think about this. How did a movement sparked by the pure, optimistic ideals of liberty and equality ultimately descend into mass executions and absolute chaos? Keep that question in the back of your mind as we go, because to truly understand the modern world, we really have to understand this incredibly sharp, double-edged sword.
All right, let's set the stage with Section 1, a nation on the brink.
So picture France in 1789. Society was defined by staggering, almost unimaginable inequality, divided into what they called three estates. You've got the first estate, the clergy, and the second estate, the nobility. Together, they made up just 3% of the population. Just 3%! Yet they owned almost all the land and paid virtually zero in taxes. That left a massive 97%, the third estate, carrying the entire financial weight of a nation that was completely drowning in debt from years of war, including, by the way, funding the American Revolution.
And listen, this wasn't just some abstract debate about tax policy. It was a matter of basic, brutal survival. The sentiment on the streets was incredibly clear. We work, we pay, we starve, while nobles feast in gold. Out in the fields, terrible harvests were causing bread prices to completely skyrocket. Everyday families were facing the very real threat of starvation. Meanwhile, King Louis XVI lived in absolute luxury inside the Palace of Versailles. And you know that famous let them eat cake line attributed to Queen Marie Antoinette? Yeah, completely made up. It's a myth. But it perfectly captures the public's anger and highlights how painfully out of touch the royals were, with everyday folks fighting just to survive.
Now mix that intense physical misery with a profound intellectual awakening. Enlightenment thinkers were spreading some seriously dangerous new ideas. Voltaire was out there openly criticizing religious authority. Jean-Jacques Rousseau was arguing that a government absolutely must serve its people. Montesquieu was promoting the separation of powers. Everyday citizens started reading these ideas and asking questions they had never really asked before, like why should a king rule absolutely? And why shouldn't the people just govern themselves? The old order was literally cracking under the weight of these empowering thoughts.
Which brings us right into Section 2, the revolution ignites.
Things escalate incredibly fast in the year 1789. The king tries to solve the financial crisis by calling a massive meeting of the Estates General in May, but it completely backfires. The Third Estate, tired of being ignored, just breaks off and forms their own National Assembly in June. They actually swear an oath on an indoor tennis court to write a brand new constitution. Then, boom, July 14th, a furious crowd storms the Bastille. They weren't just attacking a medieval fortress and a symbol of royal tyranny. They were desperately looking for gunpowder to arm themselves. Once that fortress falls, it's like a domino effect. The entire feudal system across France begins to collapse in a massive wave of peasant revolts.
Out of that crazy summer of upheaval comes a truly historic document. Its crucial premise: all men are born free and equal. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen meant that power no longer belonged to the king, it belonged to the nation. This single text established freedom of speech, equality before the law, and popular sovereignty. It was a real game changer. It's literally the blueprint that fuels modern human rights movements to this very day.
But of course, paper promises don't make bread, right? Let's move to Section 3, Fall of the Crown.
The incredible euphoria of these new rights quickly met the grumbling stomachs of a starving populace. The monarchy was rapidly losing control. Queen Marie Antoinette had become the ultimate symbol of royal excess. So, in October, thousands of hungry, desperate women, many of them really tough Paris market workers, marched miles in the pouring rain out to Versailles demanding bread. They effectively took the royal family hostage and forced them back to Paris. Meanwhile, neighboring monarchies like Austria and Prussia were terrified this revolution would spread to their own countries, so they threatened to intervene. And France's response? They went ahead and declared war, which, as you can imagine, only threw more fuel on the revolutionary fire.
By 1792, we see a complete societal flip. Think about the paradigm shift here. Under the absolute monarchy, people were merely passive subjects, ruled by a king who was supposedly chosen by God. But under the new republic, the monarchy was abolished entirely. People became active citizens of the nation. This wasn't just a basic change in government. This was a fundamental, total shift in human identity.
Which leads us to one of the most shocking moments in all of human history. On January 21, 1793,
King Louis XVI was executed for treason, and they used a new device, originally designed by doctors to be a humane and painless method of death, the guillotine. Just pause and think about the magnitude of that for a second. A king, believed to rule by the divine will of God, was killed by his own people. When that blade dropped, it sent a terrifying, undeniable message to every single monarch in Europe. The age of absolute monarchy had just suffered a fatal blow.
Okay, let's dive into the darkest swing of our pendulum with Section 4, the Reign of Terror.
At this point, France was facing foreign invasions, internal civil war, and total economic collapse. It was a mess. Desperate to protect their fragile new republic, the nation entered an era of absolute horror. Under the leadership of Maximilien Robespierre and an ironically named group called the Committee of Public Safety, incredibly harsh measures were put into place. The guillotine became a ruthless weapon of mass revolutionary justice. We're talking about tens of thousands of lives claimed between 1793 and 1794. Trials were incredibly swift, and executions just became this constant daily spectacle.
Paranoia completely consumed the nation. The mood on the streets was incredibly grim. As the saying went, today's patriot becomes tomorrow's traitor. The revolution was quite literally devouring its own. Anyone accused of being an enemy of the republic could be subjected to the blade. And I mean anyone. Even for something as minor as complaining about the price of bread, or just not being enthusiastic enough about the revolution. Fear, above all else, was the true ruler of France during this period.
But, terror is impossible to control forever. Eventually, the people grew utterly terrified of Robespierre himself. In July 1794, the architect of all this terror was finally arrested. After a really chaotic standoff and a failed suicide attempt that shattered his jaw, he died beneath the very same blade he used against so many others. Actually, his execution finally brought an end to the most radical, blood-soaked phase of the entire revolution.
Out of that deep exhaustion and chaos, a new chapter begins. Let's look at Section 5, A World Forever Changed.
Enter a young, brilliant military officer named Napoleon Bonaparte. Capitalizing on the nation's total exhaustion and this intense, desperate desire for order, he seized power in a 1799 coup. This effectively ended the internal revolution. But here's the massive twist of irony for you. While he crowned himself emperor, essentially replacing one absolute monarch with another, his marching armies actually dismantled old feudal systems. They expanded legal equality across the continent through the Napoleonic Code. So strangely enough, he spread the revolution's principles through military conquest.
The global impacts of all this were immense, and it's exactly why this history matters so much to us today. The revolution proved, once and for all, that the ancient order could be broken. It popularized modern democracy, establishing the fundamental idea that sovereignty belongs to the people. It ended feudalism, saying merit and citizenship are more important than noble birth. It gave rise to modern nationalism, where people finally identify with their country rather than just a king. And it was a direct global inspiration, sparking fights against colonial rule in Latin America and fueling the 1848 uprisings all across Europe.
As impartial learners looking back at all the facts, we really have to hold two truths at once. On one hand, we have the incredibly inspiring legacy, the birth of democracy, equal human rights, and secular government. But on the other hand, we simultaneously have to acknowledge the tragic reality, the shocking political extremism, mass executions, and endless war. The French Revolution stands as a powerful, brilliant beacon of human rights, while at the exact same time serving as a grim, undeniable warning about how quickly political extremism can spiral dangerously out of control.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with the very words that defined the era. Words that still echo in protests in parliaments around the globe right now. Liberty, equality, fraternity. When millions of people finally realize that power can and absolutely should belong to them, the world can never go back to the way it was. But it leaves us with one incredibly difficult, provocative question to ponder. Is the profound, bloody cost of revolution ever truly justified for the price of freedom? Think about that and keep exploring.